Nowadays, the term fascist or fascism is being thrown around quite a lot, and all of my family members over the age of 43 are quite upset by it. I know that all the people watching this video right now have just been begging me to make this video, so I'm here to show you that your requests don't fall upon deaf ears. Keep in mind that I am in fact a highly accredited source, and you should be forming all of your opinions off of me. In all seriousness, fascism is, in my opinion, a major problem in the modern day. We should be having a legitimate definition in academic debate, not just a term to be shrugged off because Trump isn't literally genociding the Jewish community. What a lot of people nowadays don't really realize about fascism is how difficult it is to define. What I mean by this is that fascism has changed so much since the days of Hitler or Mussolini. It's changed to the point where we probably won't see another fascist government ever again. Genocide and totalitarianism is not a qualification for something to be fascist. Just because we've seen it in certain fascist governments over the period of history, not mean that it is necessary for something to qualify as being fascist. Rather, it is an extreme that we've seen in fascist governments through the course of history. We have seen both democratic and totalitarian socialist countries in history. So it would be kind of immature to deem socialism as either democratic or totalitarian, at least when we're looking back in history. The difference between fascism and socialism, as far as whether or not we've seen democratic fascist countries in history, is the lack of a coherent definition. No one can, or probably ever will, define fascism in a way that everybody will agree on, even if it's academically sound. This difficulty in debate over the definition makes it incredibly difficult to debate whether or not something is fascist. Roger Griffin, British professor of modern history, political theorist at Oxford Brookes University, and one of the most revered people in fascist studies, defines fascism as palingenetic ultranationalism. Palingenetic, in the context of Griffin's definition, means a myth of national rebirth or regeneration, with root word palin meaning again and genetic meaning birth or creation. Ultranationalism, in that same context, is defined by Griffin as an extreme exclusionary form of nationalism that often refers to the nation as a living organism capable of being sick, strong, under threat, etc. Roger Griffin's definition is absolutely key to defining fascism, and it's one which I personally believe to be at the core of the definition. Where many philosophers, professors, and political scientists overlap in their definitions of fascism is 4 tenets: cult of personality, idealized past, victimhood, and passionate opportunism. So let's go through them and define each one of the tenets that I believe define fascism. Tenet 1. Cult of personality. Roger Griffin also defines this as key to fascist politics, along with Robert Paxton, Umberto Eco, Emilio Gentile, Jason Stanley, and Adrian Teopor Popan. I admittedly have not read the works of all these fascist theoreticians, but cut me some slack. I'm not a very fast reader. The cult of personality essentially centers the nation, state, and political movement entirely around the leader rather than an ideology. Opposition to the leader is seen as treasonous. The cult of personality is described by its proponents, meaning the people that believe in the cult of personality, as a necessity, and frames the leader's ability to decide for the nation as above the ability of the written law to do the same. Hitler himself outlined his version of the cult of personality through something called the infallible Führer. This stated that Hitler was some sort of all-knowing genius, and that anything that he ordered that was outside of the law was in fact the correct thing because Hitler was framed as knowing more about the needs of the people than the laws put in place to do the same. Mussolini framed it similarly, with his concept of the universal man. This essentially stated that he was a man who excelled in all areas, intellectual, physical, or otherwise. Mussolini, unlike Hitler, used the Catholic faith to an enormous extent to solidify his legitimacy, despite being an atheist. He made Catholicism the official state religion, gave the Vatican its own state, and instituted religious education. This was done not out of Mussolini's dedication to his faith, because as I mentioned previously, he was an atheist. This was rather done by Mussolini to cement his dictatorship with a heavily Catholic Italian population, and it was done by Pope Pius XI to restore the power of the Church. This Catholic legitimacy calls back to the cult of personalities perpetuated by monarchs, when they were displayed as being chosen by God to rule via the divine right of kings. This religious legitimacy is not required for fascism, but it is fascistic in nature. Tenet 2. Idealized past. The idealized past calls back to Roger Griffin's pangenetic ultranationalism in terms of a rebirth of a mythic past society. The idea is that the nation is undergoing a pattern of decline and demands a rebirth. This is done by centering around a nation, culture, or ethnicity in a deeply mythic way to create a sense of historical greatness, unity, and nostalgia. This past that is so heavily focused on is a mere construction of the fascist mind, and is not a genuine, historically accurate version of history, but rather one that focuses only on the good of the nation and never the critical version of history that could also be mentioning inconvenient realities or the contributions of groups deemed the enemy. This will be further talked about in the victimhood tenet, but the fascist believes that this mythic and ideal past has been taken away and destroyed by the enemy, which could be liberal elites, Marxists, minorities, or any other anti-reactionary entity, which creates a sense of humiliation and victimhood. The mythic past created by the Nazis is that of the master race of Aryans that was destined to rule all of human civilization. Christian influence was replaced with pagan beliefs and practices that focus more on the blood and soil that the people allegedly shared with the mythic Aryan master race. They claimed that modern scientific knowledge was misleading and corrupted the truth. They instead opted to use alleged secret knowledge of nature and instinctive beliefs to justify their completely mythic ideals. Mussolini and his regime would take up the mantle once held by the great Julius Caesar and restore this mythic steelman version of Rome. The steelman is essentially the opposite of a strawman, which, if you haven't heard of it yet, is a retelling that misrepresents the argument to make it less appealing. The steelman is the exact opposite of the strawman, because the steelman, while still misrepresenting it, tells the story in a way that makes it seem more appealing. The fascists may use the strawman to explain the present that they're trying to uproot or the past of the perceived enemy, and they may use the steelman to represent future they're trying to create. Tenet 3. Victimhood. When you frame yourself as this big strong man defeating a weak enemy, it does a good job at winning over a certain type of people, but it has some serious limits because it's offensive rather than defensive. On the other hand, if you frame yourself as the morally just and incorrectly discriminated group, you can easily win over the majority of that group, because it becomes a defensive measure rather than an offensive one. This also plays in the fascist ideal of being a reactionary and revolutionary entity at the same time. The two words reactionary and revolutionary together is on all counts an oxymoron, which is what makes fascism such a uniquely dangerous ideology. It is revolutionary in rhetoric, by framing itself as a vanguard against the perceived enemy, and reactionary in action by discriminating against certain groups and bending the knee to whichever group allows the path of least resistance. Victimhood is very interesting when talking about fascism, because at least in the modern day, the people most often called fascists, such as Donald Trump or Viktor Orban, say that the opposition is framing themselves as the victims, and they're using that to gain political power, when in reality, the fascists do the same thing, only far more subtle. Rather than openly state the many things done against marginalized groups or standing against economic inequality in their rhetoric, fascists frame themselves as victims of liberal elites and progressive policies, which have discriminated against them and led to the decline of the nation they defend. The idea of victimhood is well explored in Jason Stanley's book, How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, where he explains in chapter simply titled Victimhood, how movements dedicated to equality are framed by fascists as being offensive maneuvers against them. White people are threatened by desegregation, men are threatened by feminism, and Christians are threatened by secular policy. The common denominator in these examples is framing equality as supremacy. No one can deny the fact that the civil rights movement and the black supremacist movement are different, and yet the fascist claims they are indistinguishable, such as Hitler's belief that any form of equality with the black race would be a threat to Aryan supremacy. As I mentioned previously in the tenet on idealized past, fascism frames certain groups as the reason for the decline from the glorious past. If we accept that the past is perfect and the modern day is bad, it isn't difficult to understand the fascist thinking. You've probably heard the term correlation equals causation, and it basically means that because A happened at the same time as X, A is the reason for X. To apply this correlation equals causation fallacy to fascism, simply replace the A in our formula with generally good things and our X with some time in the past. The good things in the past are intentionally kept incredibly vague to maximize the potential power to unify a people who are divided and searching for a purpose. If Mussolini was too specific on the exact who, what, are you serious, Mayor? If Mussolini was too specific on the exact who, what, when, where, and why about his idealized past, he might be unintentionally alienating his potential base, which transitions into our final main tenet. Tenet 4. Passionate opportunism. This tenet kind of doubles as 2, which I'm only adding in here at the end of my script writing. It's a tenet that outlines both the lack of a coherent ideology and the opportunism that influences the actions of fascists more than anything else. Fascism is so incredibly different from any other ideology that it has become a word defined often by authoritarianism rather than an actual belief system. Where liberalism had John Locke and socialism had Marx to flesh out a belief system, fascism had kinda nobody. You could say they had Mussolini, but he specifically never outlined a system of beliefs for fascism, instead opting for a new approach to politics for the modern day through opportunistic ambitions rather than ambitions that are ideologically motivated. Mussolini at the start of his reign proposed heavily anti-capitalist policies that included land appropriation and worker participation. He did not wait long to scrap these ideas in favor of anti-socialist and pro-capitalist policy to win over support from landowners and industrialists. Robert Paxton, an American political scientist specializing in Vichy France, fascism, and Europe during the World War II era, states that fascism is a technique of rule, characterized by its opportunistic willingness to scrap any previously held beliefs. Fascism's potential father, Mussolini, was, as many know, a socialist prior to becoming the first fascist dictator. He was dedicated far more to the maintenance of his own personal power than to a rigid ideology. This lack of a belief system leads to the conclusion that the ideology of fascism is not an ideology, but rather just a response to a series of rapid changes at the times of fascism's conception. Notably, the First World War ended, and all across Europe, people were hopeless and angry with their situation. Fascism gave the disillusioned populace an option beyond the parliamentarians and socialists. They gave the option for them to be revolutionary, while also returning to the world as they knew it prior to World War I. Which is where my prior point on reactionary and revolutionary comes back into play. When the socialists said that it was time to fight back against the oppressive bourgeoisie and give equality to all, the fascists said that it was time to fight back against the conniving socialists and liberal elites who were inextricably linked to the period of decline that people were facing. So with that, let's get to our final definition. I'll do my best to finish the definition off in a few concise sentences, to hopefully make this as understandable as possible. Fascism is an ideology different from any other that prioritizes rhetoric of a mythic past of a chosen group that has also been destroyed by the target group, creating a sense of victimhood. The leader of the fascist movement is all-knowing and not required to follow any constitutional outline. Fascism is not loyal to a set of principles, and is best described as a technique of rule that prioritizes power and loyalty to the leader over loyalty to a set of beliefs. I hope I was able to set up this video in a way that was informative and easy to understand, and hopefully engaging, even though that's not really the point. I just think it should probably be engaging, the best as I can do. It took a long time to research, and even though I didn't fully read a lot of books, I did read 2, and I listened to 2, along with some good video resources, which I'll definitely be linking in the description. Definitely check those out, yo. This video literally only scratches the surface of the definition of fascism. I still have a lot of ideas for future videos to further flesh out my ideas, so make sure to stay tuned for that, yo. I'm not looking to make a career off this, obviously, just, sort of a little passion project that I can do outside of work and school. I definitely encourage all you guys to do the same thing if you're interested in any topics that you don't really get a chance to look into. This project was worth absolutely every second that went into researching and creating this. I'm really proud of my script, at least. I haven't seen the final video yet, obviously, because I'm recording it right now. But I'm sure I'll be relatively proud of the final video, at least. I also want to say here, kind of towards the end, that I will be making a video relatively soon about fascism in the modern day, because I know it's a pretty, contentious topic. I sprinkled some of that stuff in throughout the thing. So with that being said, thank you guys for watching. Bye-bye. Who's this handsome devil? Who's this handsome devil? Huh? This is my favorite member of the Ian Ciudad cinematic universe. All right. I think it's good. Love you guys.